September 18th, 1944, near Nancy, France. Rain had turned the roads into rivers of mud. Trucks sat stranded along the shoulder while exhausted American soldiers stood beside them, boots soaked, helmets dripping, staring at a crossroads where hundreds of frightened French civilians waited in silence. Beyond them, a line of German prisoners of war stood under armed guard, their uniforms stained with dust, their faces hollow from days of retreat. No one moved. A supply convoy had just arrived carrying enough fuel to keep only one column advancing before nightfall. The order from Corps headquarters was clear. Fuel the tanks. Leave everyone else behind until morning. But there was one problem. The civilians would not survive another freezing night without transportation. Neither would several wounded American soldiers lying in overloaded ambulances. The officers argued in hushed voices while engines idled. Every passing minute brought German artillery closer. Then a young lieutenant quietly folded the written order and looked across the gathering. His jaw tightened. This order is wrong. The words hung in the cold air. Every soldier nearby stopped what he was doing. Nobody spoke, because everyone knew exactly whose operational plan those orders represented, and questioning them in front of the entire staff could destroy a military career before sunset. Lieutenant Daniel Mercer had served less than 2 years in uniform. Before the war, he had been a schoolteacher in Ohio. He wasn't famous for bravery or reckless speeches. He was known for reading every map twice and never raising his voice. Colonel Harold Benton slowly turned toward him. "What did you say, Lieutenant?" Mercer answered without hesitation. "I said these orders don't fit what's happening here." Several captains immediately looked down at their maps. A major whispered, "Careful." The colonel's face hardened. "Those instructions came through Army Command." "I know they did, sir." "And you're saying Army Command made a mistake?" Mercer shook his head. "I'm saying whoever issued them didn't see what's standing in front of us." Silence spread through the staff circle. Nearby, Sergeant Thomas Gallagher watched the exchange while pretending to check his rifle. He had seen officers lose promotions for much less. One careless sentence could follow a man for the rest of his career. The colonel stepped closer. "Explain yourself." Mercer pointed toward the civilians. "They've been moving for 3 days." He pointed toward the ambulances. "Our wounded haven't eaten since yesterday." Finally, he looked toward the tanks. "If we fuel every armored vehicle now, we leave human beings sitting in open fields while the temperature drops below freezing." The colonel folded his arms. "Our mission is offensive operations. Our mission is victory," Mercer replied. "But victory loses something if we stop seeing people." No one dared breathe. Even the German prisoners watched. One elderly French woman held a little girl's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The colonel dismissed the gathering. "Enough." He ordered Mercer to remain where he stood. The rest of the officers walked away without speaking. By evening, reports describing the confrontation had already climbed through headquarters. The wording changed with every retelling. Some claimed Mercer had challenged command authority. Others insisted he had embarrassed senior officers. By midnight, one sentence reached higher headquarters. A lieutenant publicly declared General Patton's operational orders were wrong. That version traveled the fastest. The next morning dawned cold and gray. The camp woke earlier than usual. Rumors moved faster than breakfast. "They're replacing him. He's finished. They'll send him behind the lines." Mercer said nothing. He simply adjusted his jacket and waited. Around noon, a line of jeeps rolled through the entrance. Military police stepped aside. Every conversation stopped. General George S. Patton climbed out of the lead vehicle. His polished helmet reflected the pale sunlight. His revolvers rested at his sides. He walked with the confidence of a man who expected movement, not excuses. Nobody saluted late. Nobody looked away. Patton acknowledged the officers with a brief nod. His expression revealed nothing. Inside the operations tent, maps covered every table. The officers assembled quietly. Mercer stood near the back. Patton looked across the room. "The lieutenant." Mercer stepped forward. "Sir." Patton studied him for several seconds. "The reports say you announced my orders were wrong." "Yes, sir." "You said that in front of your commanding officers?" "Yes, sir." The room became perfectly still. Even pencils stopped moving. Patton slowly unfolded the written operations order. Then he placed it flat on the table. "What exactly was wrong with it?" Mercer answered carefully. "Nothing on paper, sir." Patton raised an eyebrow. Mercer continued. The situation changed faster than the paperwork. He walked toward the map after receiving a slight nod. The enemy demolished this bridge 6 hours before the order reached us. He pointed farther south. These refugee columns doubled overnight. Another point. Our ambulances became trapped behind destroyed vehicles. Another. The fuel calculations assumed roads that no longer existed. He stopped speaking. Nobody interrupted. Patton looked at the map, then at the intelligence reports, then toward the logistics officer. When were these bridge reports confirmed? Yesterday afternoon, sir. Were they forwarded? Not immediately. Patton turned toward another officer. And the refugee numbers? We underestimated them, sir. Patton said nothing. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. The room waited. Finally, he looked back at Mercer. You didn't say the orders were wrong. Mercer remained silent. Patton continued. You said reality had changed. Yes, sir. Patton nodded once. There is a difference. Several officers shifted uneasily. Patton's voice remained calm. A written order is only as good as the information behind it. Nobody moved. He looked around the room. If conditions change, good officers report it. Another pause. Great officers act on it. The silence felt heavier than shouting. Patton walked toward the tent entrance. He looked outside at the waiting civilians. Children wrapped themselves in warm blankets. American medics shared coffee with elderly refugees. German prisoners quietly unloaded medical supplies under armed supervision. Patton watched without speaking. Then he asked Sergeant Gallagher one simple question. Who organized this? Gallagher hesitated. The lieutenant suggested using the prisoners to help move supplies under guard, sir. Patton looked toward the prisoners. None had attempted escape. Instead, they carefully carried stretchers across the muddy field. A German corporal paused to let an elderly Frenchman climb into a truck. War had not erased humanity. It had merely buried it beneath fear. Patton slowly removed one glove. He pointed toward the fuel convoy. Split it. The logistics officer blinked. Sir, fuel half the tanks. He pointed again. The rest goes to evacuation trucks. No one objected. The offensive begins 6 hours later, Patton added. A delayed attack with living soldiers is worth more than a perfect schedule surrounded by frozen civilians. The order spread through camp within minutes. Engines restarted. Ambulances rolled first. Then trucks loaded families. The tanks waited. Not happily, but patiently. Some officers exchanged uncertain looks. They had expected punishment. Instead, they were watching adaptation. Late that afternoon, Patton called the senior staff together once more. His tone remained steady. I've spent this war demanding speed. He paused. But speed without judgment becomes waste. He looked directly at Mercer. Never confuse obedience with blindness. Several younger officers quietly absorbed every word. Patton turned toward Colonel Benton. The lieutenant embarrassed no one. Another pause. He reminded us to keep seeing the battlefield as it exists, not as yesterday's paperwork described it. No one argued. There was nothing left to argue. That evening, engineers finished a temporary crossing farther north. Because the civilians had already been evacuated, military traffic flowed without interruption. The delayed offensive resumed before dawn. American armor crossed the new route and encountered weaker German resistance than expected. Several intelligence officers later admitted the revised movement had accidentally avoided an artillery concentration waiting along the original road. Lives had been saved twice. Once through compassion, once through flexibility. The next morning, headquarters assembled again. Mercer expected another briefing. Instead, Colonel Benton entered carrying a sealed envelope. He looked at Mercer for several seconds before speaking. Front and center. Mercer stepped forward. The colonel opened the envelope. By authority of Army Command, effective immediately. The room stood silent. Lieutenant Daniel Mercer is promoted to captain. A few soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. Mercer himself appeared stunned. The colonel folded the paper. There is an additional note. He cleared his throat. Initiative grounded in responsibility strengthens command rather than weakens it. Everyone knew whose words those were. Patton never entered the room. He didn't need to. His decision had already spoken louder than another speech could. As Captain Mercer accepted the new insignia, Sergeant Gallagher smiled quietly from the back of the room. Yesterday, he had expected to witness a career ending. Instead, he had witnessed leadership recognizing courage that required no battlefield charge. Only honesty. Years later, Veterans remembered the promotion differently. Some recalled the maps. Others remembered the rain, the civilians, or the German prisoners carrying stretchers beside American medics. But nearly everyone remembered the silence inside that operations tent, because it revealed something many young soldiers had never fully understood. The strongest leaders were not those who demanded agreement. They were the ones confident enough to face uncomfortable truth when lives depended on it. War often rewarded courage under fire. Yet sometimes the rarest courage appeared around a planning table, where one respectful voice risked everything to prevent tomorrow's tragedy. The battle for France continued. Many more lives would be lost before victory finally arrived. But for one muddy crossroads near Nancy, humanity marched beside military necessity instead of behind it. And the men who stood there never forgot that a calm conversation had changed far more than one officer's career. It reminded everyone present that the purpose of command was never simply to enforce orders. It was to make the best possible decisions for the people entrusted to them, even when circumstances demanded the humility to change course. What would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe.